The crash landing. The console screamed with alarms as Xander Cade fought to keep his ship from shaking apart. Red lights flashed urgently, illuminating his grim features. Outside the cockpit window, the alien planet loomed, an ominous sphere of crimson and shadow. "Mayday, Mayday," Xander shouted into the comms. "This is the Starship Nebula. I've lost helm control. I'm going down." Only static crackled in reply. Xander gritted his teeth as the planet's atmosphere engulfed his ship. The hull groaned under the stress, the bulkheads rattling violently. He yanked on the control stick with all his strength, desperately trying to level out, but it was no use. The ground rushed up to meet him, a barren expanse of rock and dust. With a tremendous boom, the ship plowed into the planet's surface, metal screeching as it tore and buckled. Xander was hurled forward, his head slamming into the console. Darkness consumed his vision. Slowly, painfully, he came to. Smoke filled the cockpit, acrid and thick. Giddily, Xander unbuckled his harness and staggered to his feet. He coughed, covering his mouth with his sleeve. He had to get out of here. He stumbled to the emergency hatch, fingers fumbling with the release. With a hiss, it popped open, and he clambered out. Xander fell to his knees on the rocky ground, gulping in lungfuls of air. He looked up, squinting against the harsh alien sun. His ship was a twisted wreck, half buried in the reddish dirt. Scorched metal and shattered composites were strewn as far as he could see. Xander's heart sank. There would be no flying out of here. Unsteadily, he rose to his feet, assessing his surroundings. The landscape was utterly desolate. Nothing but cracked earth and jutting stones in every direction. No signs of life, no hints of civilization, just an endless, hostile wasteland. Xander took inventory of his situation. The crash had destroyed most of his supplies. All he had was the emergency kit he always kept on his person, a canteen of water, a handful of nutrient bars, a small medkit, a flare gun with 3 flares, and a multi-tool. It wasn't much to survive on. He knew his chances were slim. This planet was uncharted, light years from any known trade route, and with his distress beacons smashed beyond repair, the odds of anyone finding him were next to zero. He was well and truly stranded. But Xander was no stranger to long odds. You didn't become an intergalactic explorer without a hefty dose of courage and resourcefulness. He had a quick mind, steady hands, and a stubborn will to live. If anyone could make it out here, it was him. He slung his emergency kit over his shoulder and picked a direction at random. There was nothing to do but start walking and hope he found shelter before nightfall. The sun beat down mercilessly overhead as he set off. Hours blended together as Xander trudged across the barren expanse, his leather boots scuffing against the cracked earth. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. His canteen was already half empty. He rationed his water carefully, taking only small, measured sips. As the shadows lengthened, Xander's spirits began to flag. His muscles ached and his head swam from the heat. He was no closer to finding shelter or water. Just more rocks, more dust, more desolation stretching endlessly in all directions. In the delirium of exhaustion, his thoughts turned dark. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was how the great Xander Cade met his end, alone on some forsaken rock, thousands of light years from home. It seemed a bitter irony, after all his adventures dodging asteroids and running blockades, outfoxing the galaxy's most notorious mercenaries and rogues. But just as despair threatened to swallow him, something caught his eye. He blinked, wondering if it was a mirage conjured by his fatigued mind. But no, there, jutting up from the wasteland, was a towering stone formation. Xander changed course, hope flickering anew in his chest. As he drew closer, he saw that the stones formed a sort of natural amphitheater, with a small pool of water at the center. He could have wept with relief. He half stumbled, half ran the final distance, falling to his knees at the water's edge. It was cool and clear, an impossible blessing in this forsaken hellscape. He scooped it up greedily, splashing it over his parched face. The liquid soothed his cracked lips and eased the pounding in his skull. As Xander drank deeply, he looked around at the strange stone sentinels encircling the oasis. Their surfaces were worn smooth by centuries of wind and sand, but he could still make out odd symbols etched into their faces, alien hieroglyphs whose meaning was long lost. He realized this place must have held some significance eons ago. The hazy figures of a dead civilization seemed to whisper in the arid breeze. The weight of the planet's secrets pressed down on him, a reminder of how insignificant he was in the vast tapestry of the cosmos. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Xander whipped around, every muscles tensing. There, half hidden in the lengthening shadows, stood a figure. It was humanoid, but unlike any being he'd encountered before. Willowy and lithe, with skin that shifted between shades of lavender and cerulean. Long silver hair cascaded down its back, catching the dying light. But most striking of all were its eyes, vibrant orbs of molten gold that seemed to pierce straight through to his soul. The figure stepped forward, and Xander saw it was female. An alien woman, as stunningly beautiful as she was strange. She wore a gossamer shift that left little to the imagination, accentuating her supple curves. Her full lips parted, and she spoke in a language lyrical and melodious. Xander's mind raced. Who was she? What was she doing alone on this desolate world? 1,000 questions burned on his tongue. He rose slowly, hands held out in a universal gesture of peace. The moment stretched taut between them, human and alien, strangers brought together by the capricious whims of fate. Xander took a step forward. The woman held her ground, head tilted, eyes gleaming with alert curiosity. In that moment, the last rays of the alien sun painted the stones in shades of fire. A breeze rippled the surface of the glassy pool. And on that desolate, distant planet, beneath unfamiliar stars, two lonely souls reached out across the void of space and species, drawn together by the fundamental spark of connection that unites all living things. Xander spoke, his voice ringing with urgency and wonder in the preternatural stillness. "Hello," he said simply. "My name is Xander Cade, and I think maybe you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." First contact. The alien woman regarded Xander with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She spoke again in her melodic language, her words flowing like a gentle stream over smooth stones. Though Xander couldn't understand her, her tone was gentle, almost soothing. Xander tried again, speaking slowly and clearly. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Do you speak Terran? I'm lost and my ship is destroyed. I need help." The woman tilted her head, as if trying to parse his words. Then, to Xander's astonishment, she reached out and placed her hand on his forehead. Her touch was cool and electric, sending a shiver down his spine. Suddenly, Xander's mind was flooded with images and sensations. He saw towering cities of crystal and light, vast gardens teeming with exotic flora, and strange, beautiful creatures soaring through lavender skies. He felt the woman's emotions, her loneliness, her yearning, her hope, and he understood. "Vexilira," he breathed, the alien words strange yet familiar on his tongue. "Your name is Styra." The woman, Fajira, smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Xander K," she said, her accent turning his name into a song. "You are welcome here." Xander's heart raced. Somehow, impossibly, Xalera had forged a mental link between them. He could feel her thoughts brushing against his own, a gentle presence at the edges of his consciousness. "How did you do that?" he asked, awed and a little frightened by the alien intimacy of it. Cyrus' smile turned mysterious. "My people have many gifts," she said, "gifts that have been both a blessing and a curse." She turned and gestured for him to follow. "Come. The night grows cold, and there is much you need to know." Xander hesitated for only a moment before falling into step beside her. As they walked, Axelera told him about her world, a planet of wonders and terrors, of ancient secrets and hidden dangers. Long ago, my people were a proud civilization, she said, her voice tinged with melancholy. We were explorers, scientists, dreamers. We built great ships that sailed the cosmic winds, and we seeded life on 1,000 worlds. But then the Mar Kala came, creatures of shadow and hunger that devoured everything in their path. They laid waste to our cities, shattered our fleets, and scattered my people to the stars. Thyra paused, her golden eyes distant. Now, I am all that remains, the last guardian of a dying world. Xander's heart ached for her. He knew all too well the pain of loss, the weight of loneliness. Impulsively, he reached out and took her hand. To his surprise, she didn't pull away. I'm so sorry, he said softly. I can't imagine how that feels. Axira looked at him, and in her eyes he saw a glimmer of something, gratitude, perhaps, or understanding. Thank you, Xander Cade. Your compassion means more than you know. They walked in silence for a while, hand in hand, two lost souls finding solace in each other's presence. Eventually, they reached a small cave, its entrance half hidden by a curtain of shimmering vines. We will be safe here, Xaira said, leading him inside. The cave was surprisingly warm and dry, lit by the soft glow of bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls. Sura gestured for Xander to sit, then knelt beside him. May I? She asked, her hand hovering near his temple. Xander nodded, trusting her implicitly. Once again, he felt the cool touch of her mind against his own. But this time, instead of images, he felt a flooding warmth, a sense of peace and safety that soothed his battered soul. When Syra withdrew, Xander felt refreshed, his aches and pains muted. What was that? He asked, marveling at the alien sensation. Xira smiled enigmatically. A gift of my people, a sharing of strength to help you heal. She settled beside him, her shoulder brushing his. In the soft light of the cave, her beauty was breathtaking. Xander felt his heart flutter in a way it hadn't in years. Tell me about your world, Tahira said, her eyes alight with curiosity. Tell me about the stars you sailed, the wonders you've seen. And so Xander did. He told her of the soaring towers of New Jakarta, the singing crystals of Aldebaran Prime, the great migration of the star whales of Orion's Drift. He spoke of the thrill of discovery, the joy of charting the unknown reaches of the galaxy. Sarah listened raptly, her gaze never leaving his face. When he finished, she sighed. It sounds beautiful. To explore, to learn, to see the infinite diversity of the cosmos, that was once the dream of my people. Xander squeezed her hand. It still can be. There's so much out there, Axelara. So many worlds to discover, so many mysteries to unravel. And with your gifts, your knowledge, imagine what we could achieve together. Axelara's eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting within their golden depths. Together? She whispered, as if hardly daring to believe it. Xander's heart thundered in his chest. He knew it was impulsive, reckless even, but something about Axera called to him, a connection deeper than mere attraction or companionship. Yes, he said firmly, together. I don't know how yet, but we'll find a way off this planet. We'll find a way to rebuild your people's legacy. I promise. Tears glimmered in Axera's eyes, tears of joy, of relief, of tentative hope reborn. Xander Cade, she murmured, cupping his face with her slender hands. You are a rare soul indeed. And then in the sheltering embrace of that alien cave, on a world spinning silently through the vast emptiness of space, Kazera kissed him. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of honey and starlight. Xander melted into her, losing himself in the impossible sweetness of the moment. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know how they would survive the perils of this world, or how they would find their way back to the stars. But he knew, with a certainty that surpassed all logic or reason, that his path was now inextricably intertwined with Asira's. As they lay down together on the soft moss, limbs entangled and hearts beating in synchrony, Xander marveled at the strange turns of fate. Just hours ago, he had been alone and hopeless, facing certain death on an alien world. But now, impossibly, he had found not just a chance at survival, but a chance at something far greater. A chance at love, at connection, at a future he had never dared to imagine. As he drifted off to sleep, lulled by the warmth of Syra's body and the gentle hum of the cave's living light, Xander's last thought was a simple prayer of thanks to whatever cosmic force had brought them together. For in that moment, he knew he had found something worth fighting for, worth living for, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. Learning to survive, Xander awoke to the soft caress of alien sunlight on his face. For a moment, he lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the memories came rushing back, the crash, the desolate landscape, and Axera. He sat up, looking around the cave. Axera was nowhere to be seen, but a strange, melodic humming echoed from outside. Curious, Xander stood and made his way to the entrance. What he saw took his breath away. Axera stood in the center of a small garden, her arms outstretched and her eyes closed in concentration. Around her, the alien plants swayed and danced, their leaves and petals shimmering with an inner light. As Syra hummed, the plants seemed to respond, growing and changing before Xander's eyes. Syra? He called softly, not wanting to break her concentration. She opened her eyes and smiled at him, the glow of her alien magic fading. "Good morning, Xander Cade. I hope you slept well." Xander shook his head in wonder. "What was that? What were you doing?" Syra's smile turned mysterious. "Communing with the life of this world. It's one of the gifts of my people, the ability to connect with and shape the energies of nature." She plucked a strange, luminous fruit from one of the plants and offered it to him. "Here, this will give you strength for the journey ahead." Xander took the fruit, marveling at its weight and warmth in his hand. He bit into it tentatively, and flavors exploded across his tongue, sweet and tart, with a hint of something indescribably alien. He felt energy suffuse his body, chasing away the lingering aches and fatigue. "That's incredible," he said, swallowing the last bite. "Is that how your people survived here, by shaping the plants to sustain you?" Axura nodded. "Yes, and by learning the secrets of the Zulkira, the ancient ones who came before us." She led him deeper into the garden, to a weathered stone obelisk half hidden by twisting vines. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, glowing faintly with an inner light. The Zulkira were masters of life and energy, Kaxira explained, running her fingers over the symbols. They could manipulate matter on a fundamental level, crafting wonders beyond imagining. This obelisk contains some of their knowledge, passed down to my people. Xander leaned closer, fascinated. Some of the symbols looked familiar, resembling the equations of advanced quantum physics. "Can you read it?" he asked. Axira nodded. "Some. The language of the Zulkira is complex, layered with meanings that shift depending on context and intention. But with the knowledge contained here, I believe we can repair your distress beacon and summon help." Xander's heart leaped. "Really? You think we can fix it?" Hagster's eyes sparkled with determination. "I do, but it will not be easy. The components we need are rare and can only be found in the Whispering Canyons, a dangerous place filled with ancient traps and guardians." Xander squared his shoulders. "I'm not afraid of danger. And with your knowledge of this world and my engineering skills, I know we can do this." Thraktira took his hand, her touch sending a thrill through him. Together, she agreed softly. Over the next few days, they prepared for the journey. Thugzura taught Xander how to find sustenance in the alien landscape, which plants were safe to eat, which could be used for medicine or tools. She showed him how to read the subtle signs of the weather, how to find shelter in the twisting canyons and caves. In turn, Xander shared his knowledge of technology and science. Together, they pored over the wreckage of his ship, salvaging what they could and repurposing it for their needs. Xander marveled at Tyra's quick mind and intuitive grasp of engineering principles. With her help, he was able to construct a rudimentary scanner and translator, making communication and navigation easier. As they worked together, their bond deepened. Xander found himself sharing stories of his past, his childhood on the sprawling space stations of the Outer Rim, his years at the Academy, the thrill and heartbreak of his first command. In turn, Clarice spoke of her people's lost glory, of the wonders they had wrought and the tragedies they had endured. In the evenings, they would sit together under the alien stars, marveling at the strange constellations and the shimmering ribbons of cosmic energy that danced overhead. Fatira taught Xander the songs of her people, haunting melodies that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the universe. And always simmering beneath the surface was the growing attraction between them. Every casual touch, every shared glance was electric, charged with a tension that set Xander's blood on fire. He knew it was dangerous, knew that falling for Axtero would only make things infinitely more complicated. But he couldn't help himself. She was a miracle, a dream made flesh, and he was helpless in the face of his desire. Finally, the day of their departure arrived. They set out at dawn, Tassira leading the way with sure, swift strides. The terrain grew more treacherous as they went, the lush foliage giving way to jagged rocks and yawning chasms. As the sun reached its zenith, they'd paused to rest in the shadow of a towering cliff. Xander pulled out his canteen, taking a long, grateful drink. When he lowered it, he found Syra watching him with an inscrutable expression. "What is it?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. Xira shook her head, a faint smile playing about her lips. "Nothing. It's just, in all the tales of my people, I never imagined I would one day be traveling with an outlander on a quest to save both our lives." Xander grinned. "I guess the universe is full of surprises." Syra's smile widened. "Indeed it is." She stepped closer, her eyes intent on his. "Xander, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been wanting to say for a while now." Xander's heart began to race. "What is it?" Taxira took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. I'm falling in love with you, Xander Cade. I know it's foolish and impossible and 1,000 other things. But I can't deny what I feel. You've brought light back into my life, hope back into my heart. And I just needed you to know." For a moment, Xander couldn't speak. 1,000 emotions swirled through him: joy, fear, wonder, desire. Then, moving on instinct, he pulled Sarah into his arms and kissed her with all the passion, all the longing he'd been holding back. She melted against him, her body molding to his as if they were two halves of a single whole. Her lips were soft and hungry, her hands tangling in his hair as she pulled him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Xander rested his forehead against Axira's, marveling at the perfection of the moment. "I love you too," he whispered, the words feeling like the truest thing he'd ever said. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you. No matter what happens, no matter what dangers we face, we'll face them together." Tyra's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Together," she echoed softly, the word a promise and a prayer. And there, in the heart of that alien wilderness, two souls forged an unbreakable bond, a love that would be tested by fire and darkness, but would never waver. A love that would change the fate of worlds. The threat emerges. As Xander and Tyra ventured deeper into the whispering canyons, the air grew thick with an unseen menace. The towering rock formations seemed to lean in, their shadows lengthening like grasping fingers. Even the wind held a mournful, foreboding quality, carrying whispers that tugged at the edges of the mind. Cyrus' steps faltered, her eyes widening with sudden realization. "Xander, wait," she hissed, pulling him into the shelter of an overhanging ledge. Xander instantly went on alert, his hand hovering near his makeshift plasma cutter. "What is it? What's wrong?" "We're not alone," Tatara breathed, her voice tight with fear. "There's something out there, something ancient and terrible. I can feel its presence, like a stain on the fabric of reality." Xander's heart raced, adrenaline surging through his veins. He peered out into the canyon, searching for any sign of threat. At first, he saw nothing, but then, flickering at the edge of his vision, he caught a glimpse of movement, a sinuous, unnatural slithering among the rocks. "What is that?" he whispered, dread coiling in his gut. Zira shook her head, her face ashen. "A Markala," she said, the name heavy with dread. A creature of the void, drawn to suffering and despair. They were the scourge of my people, the architects of our downfall. Xander's mind raced, recalling the stories Thyra had told him. The Markala, nightmarish entities that fed on pain and fear, twisting reality to their will. They were the stuff of legends, the embodiment of primal horror. As if sensing their terror, the creature emerged from the shadows. It was a thing of nightmare, all writhing tentacles and gaping, fang-filled maws. Its form seemed to shift and change, defying the laws of physics and biology. And its eyes were wells of utter darkness, promising madness and oblivion. "Run," Clara gasped, her hand finding Xander's. "We have to run." They fled, careening through the canyons as the Markala pursued. Its shrieks echoed off the rocks, a sound that clawed at the mind and chilled the blood. Xander could feel its presence behind them, an aura of malice and hunger that threatened to overwhelm him. Desperation fueled their flight, lent speed to their steps. They leaped over chasms, scrambled up sheer rock faces, all the while feeling the hot breath of the beast on their necks. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet gave way. With a cry, Xander and Sarah tumbled into darkness, landing hard on a rocky outcropping. The breath was driven from Xander's lungs, stars exploding across his vision. Dimly, he was aware of Sarah beside him, her hand still gripping his. Above them, the Markala screamed its frustration, its bulk too great to follow them into the narrow fissure. "Xander, are you all right?" Fahara's voice was tight with pain and fear. Gingerly, Xander sat up, wincing at the stabbing pain in his ribs. "I think so. Nothing broken, at least. You?" "I'll live," Axera said grimly. "But we're trapped. And that thing is still up there, waiting." Xander looked around, taking stock of their surroundings. They were in a narrow vertical shaft, the walls glistening with moisture and strange, luminescent lichen. The only light came from above, a thin sliver of sky visible through the crack they'd fallen through. "There has to be a way out," he said, refusing to give in to despair. "A tunnel, a passage, something. We just have to find it." Sarah nodded, her jaw set with determination. "You're right. My people built many hidden ways through these canyons. If we can find one." They set off, picking their way cautiously through the gloom. The passages twisted and turned, branching off into yawning darkness. They moved by touch and instinct, Kyra's innate connection to the planet guiding their steps. As they walked, Xander's mind churned with questions. "Sura, what did the Markala want? Why was it hunting us?" Haxura was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with sorrow and old pain. "The Markala are drawn to suffering, to the psychic scars left by trauma and loss. And I am the last of my kind, carrying the weight of 1 billion shattered souls. To a creature like that, I must shine like a beacon in the darkness." Xander's heart ached for her. He couldn't imagine the burden she carried, the unimaginable grief of being the sole survivor of an entire civilization. Impulsively, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, pouring all his love and support into the contact. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered into her hair. "I'm here, and I will never leave you." Kavsera clung to him, her face buried in his chest. "Oh, Xander, you have no idea how much that means to me. How much you mean to me." They held each other in the darkness, drawing strength and comfort from their bond. In that moment, the horrors of the Markala seemed distant, eclipsed by the power of their connection. Finally, reluctantly, they pulled apart. "We should keep moving," Axera said softly. "The longer we stay in one place, the easier it will be for the Markala to find us." Xander nodded, squaring his shoulders. Lead the way. They pressed on, deeper into the labyrinthine passages. The air grew colder, damper, and a strange, subsonic thrumming began to vibrate through the rock. It set Xander's teeth on edge, made his skull ache with its incessant drone. "What is that?" he asked, having to shout over the noise. Cyrus' face was tight with concentration. "I'm not sure. It feels like a massive energy source somewhere deep below us. Something incredibly ancient and powerful." Xander's mind raced. Could this be what they were looking for? The key to repairing his distress beacon and escaping this planet? Suddenly, the passage opened up into a vast chamber, and there in the center of the space was a sight that stole the breath from Xander's lungs. It was a machine, but unlike any he had ever seen. Towering and intricate, it pulsed with an inner light, its surfaces covered in the swirling, eldritch symbols of the Zulkira. Energy crackled along its contours, arcing between the spires and pylons in bolts of searing radiance. By the stars, Clara breathed, her eyes wide with awe and trepidation. It's a Zulkira nexus, a conduit for the fundamental energies of the universe, the heart of their power, the wellspring of their might. Xander could only stare, his mind reeling with the implications. With a power source like this, he could do more than just repair his beacon. He could open a rift in space-time itself, create a portal back to Earth. He could go home. But even as the thought formed, a sick realization followed. To access that kind of power, he would have to interface with the machine directly, merge his consciousness with its alien systems. And the strain of that, the sheer cognitive load, it would burn out his mind like a cheap circuit, leave him a drooling vegetable. He would have to choose, his life or his sanity, his future or his very self. And in that moment, staring into the pulsing heart of an alien god, Xander knew despair. Ancient secrets. In the pulsing, eldritch light of the Zulkira nexus, Xander felt the weight of an impossible choice bearing down on him. To use the machine's power would be to sacrifice his mind, his very identity. But to turn away would be to abandon any hope of returning home, of escaping this world and the horrors that haunted it. Beside him, Axira sensed his turmoil. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, her touch a lifeline in the maelstrom of his thoughts. "Xander," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the thrumming of the machine. "There's something you need to know. About the Nexus and the true history of my people." Xander turned to her, his eyes desperate, pleading. What? What is it?" Faxura took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. The Zulkira, they were not the benevolent ancestors we once believed them to be. They were conquerors, tyrants who enslaved entire worlds and bent the fabric of reality to their will. The Nexus was the source of their power, but also their greatest crime. She gestured to the swirling symbols that covered the machine's surface. "These glyphs, they're not just a language. They're a code, a blueprint for the fundamental structure of the universe. By manipulating them, the Zulkira could alter matter, energy, even time itself." Xander's mind reeled, trying to grasp the enormity of what Syra was saying. But your people. I thought the Zulkira uplifted them, taught them the secrets of life and energy. Axilara's smile was bitter, tinged with ancient sorrow. "So we thought. But the truth is far darker. The Zulkira created us, Xander. We were their servitors, their slaves, and their experiments. They twisted our DNA, shaped us over generations to be the perfect conduits for their power." She looked down at her hands, and Xander saw that they were trembling. "The gifts of my people, our ability to manipulate energy, to commune with the life of this world, they're not natural. They're the result of the Zulkira's meddling, their quest to create the ultimate living weapons." Xander was speechless, horror and sympathy warring within him. The magnitude of what Cyrus' people had endured, the layers of lies and manipulation that had shaped their very existence, it was beyond imagining. "Vera, I'm so sorry." I can't begin to understand what this must be like for you. She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw a fierce, unbending strength, tempered by the fires of unimaginable suffering. It's not easy knowing the truth, knowing that my people's greatest achievements, our very identity, was built on a foundation of exploitation and cruelty. But it's also liberating in a way, because now, for the first time, we have a choice. She turned back to the Nexus, her expression hardening with resolve. This machine, it's an abomination, a testament to the Zulkira's hubris and disregard for life. It cannot be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. Xander frowned, a cold suspicion forming in his gut. What do you mean? Whose hands? Paxira's answer was grim, heavy with foreboding. There are others out there, Xander. Other remnants of the Zulkira's empire scattered across the stars. Some seek to reclaim their lost glory, to rebuild the tyranny of their ancestors. Others simply desire power, the ability to reshape worlds and bend the cosmos to their will. If they were to find this place, to claim the Nexus. She didn't need to finish the thought. Xander could imagine all too well the consequences of such advanced immoral beings gaining control of a machine that could rewrite the laws of physics. It would be the end of freedom, of self-determination, for every sentient species in the galaxy. We can't let that happen, he said, his voice ringing with conviction. We have to destroy it. Solara nodded, her relief palpable. Yes, it's the only way to ensure that its power can never be misused. But it won't be easy. The Nexus is protected by ancient safeguards, fail-safes put in place by the Zulkira to prevent their technology from being turned against them. To even approach it, we'll need to. She was cut off by a sound that froze the blood in Xander's veins, a high, keening wail, echoing through the chamber like the cry of a damned soul. The Malkala, drawn by the Nexus's energy like moths to a flame. They're coming. Hera whispered, her face ashen. We're out of time. Xander's mind raced, adrenaline surging through his system. He scanned the chamber, searching for anything that could be used as a weapon. His gaze fell on the plasma cutter at his belt, and a desperate plan began to form. The pylons, he said, pointing to the towering structures that surrounded the Nexus. They look like they're channeling the machine's energy. If we can disrupt them, overload their circuitry, it could trigger a feedback loop, cause the Nexus to destroy itself. Paxira finished, her eyes widening with understanding. Xander, that's brilliant. But the risk? I know, Xander said grimly. But it's our only chance. If we don't stop the Malkala here, if we let them claim the Nexus, it's not just our lives at stake, it's the fate of every living being in the universe. Paxira held his gaze for a long, charged moment. In her eyes, he saw fear, determination, and love, bright and fierce and unwavering. Together, she said softly, echoing their promise from what seemed like a lifetime ago. Together, Xander agreed, pouring all his strength, all his courage into that single word. They turned to face the Nexus, hands clasped, hearts beating as one. The Malkala's screams grew louder, closer, a symphony of hunger and malice. But Xander and Sarah stood firm, united by a bond that transcended species and origin, forged in the crucible of shared struggle and sacrifice. They were two souls against the darkness, two candles flickering in the endless night. But in that moment, standing on the precipice of annihilation, they shone brighter than the stars themselves. For they were the last, best hope of a shattered universe, the inheritors of a legacy of pain and perseverance, of cruelty and compassion. And in their joined hands, in the love that burned between them, in that love, they held the power to change the fate of worlds. The final confrontation. The Malkala surged into the chamber like a tide of living darkness, their forms writhing and twisting in defiance of natural law. The air shimmered with their malevolence, their hunger, the sheer wrongness of their existence. Xander felt their presence like a physical weight, pressing down on his mind, his soul. But he stood firm, drawing strength from Sura's presence beside him, from the unbreakable bond they shared. Together, they faced the oncoming horde, weapons raised, hearts thundering in unison. "Remember the plan," Tahira shouted over the cacophony of the Marcalla's shrieks. "We have to disrupt the pylons, overload the nexus. It's our only chance." Xander nodded grimly, his grip tightening on his plasma cutter. "I'll take the left, you take the right. And Sarah, if we don't make it out of this..." She silenced him with a fierce, desperate kiss, pouring all her love, all her soul into the contact. "We will," she whispered against his lips. "We have to. The universe needs us, Xander, and I need you." With a final, lingering look, they broke apart, each sprinting towards their designated pylon. The Marcalla surged to meet them, a writhing mass of fangs and claws and nightmare-made flesh. Xander dodged and weaved through the onslaught, his reflexes honed by years of battle and survival. He fired his plasma cutter with precision, each bolt of searing energy finding its mark in the gelatinous hide of Marcalla. The creatures screamed and thrashed, but more always took their place, an endless tide of horror. At the base of the pylon, Xander slammed his fist against the control panel, frantically inputting the overload sequence Syra had taught him. The pylon began to hum, its surface growing hot to the touch as the energy within it built to critical levels. Across the chamber, he could see Accelera engaged in her own desperate struggle, her life form dancing amidst the chaos, her bioelectric blasts leaving trails of seared flesh and ozone in their wake. She was a goddess of battle, fierce and beautiful and utterly unstoppable. But even goddesses can falter. As Xander watched, a Marcalla's tendril snaked out, wrapping around Syra's ankle and sending her crashing to the ground. She cried out in pain, her weapons skittering away across the floor. "Syra!" Xander screamed, his heart seizing in his chest. He started towards her, heedless of the danger, every fiber of his being crying out to protect her, to save her. But Syra was already moving, rolling to her feet with inhuman grace. "No," she shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. "Finish the sequence. I'll handle this." Every instinct screamed at Xander to go to her, to stand by her side and face the darkness together. But he knew she was right. The overload was their only hope, the only way to ensure the Marcalla could never claim the Nexus's power for their own. With a roar of anguish and determination, Xander turned back to the pylon, his fingers flying over the controls. Behind him he could hear the sounds of Syra's battle, the sizzle of her bioelectric blasts, the wet, tearing sound of Marcalla flesh being rent asunder. Finally, the sequence was complete. The pylon thrummed with barely contained energy, its surface now blazing with an intense actinic light. Xander turned, ready to make his final stand, and felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. Syra was down, her body broken and bleeding, surrounded by a ring of Marcalla corpses. She was still fighting, still lashing out with blasts of waning energy, but it was clear she was nearing her limit. The remaining Marcalla circled her like jackals, their maws dripping with anticipation. "No," Xander roared, the cry tearing from his throat like the howl of a wounded animal. He charged forward, plasma cutter blazing, heedless of the danger, of the certain death that awaited him. All that mattered was Syra. All that had ever mattered was her. He fought like a man possessed, like a berserker of ancient legend. Marcalla fell before him, that ichor splattering his face, his hands, but still he pressed on, driven by a love that eclipsed all fear, all reason. At last, he reached Axura's side, gathering her broken form into his arms. She looked up at him, her eyes glazed with pain, but still shining with that same fierce, unbreakable love that had sustained them through every trial, every horror. "Xander," she whispered, her voice a threadbare rasp. "The pylons, did you?" "It's done," he said, his own voice shaking with grief and rage. "The overload is starting. This whole place is going to blow." Axura smiled then, a small, triumphant thing. "We did it," she breathed. "We won." Xander shook his head, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "Not yet," he said grimly. "Not while those things still live." As if summoned by his words, the remaining Morkala began to converge on their position, their hunger, their malice and almost tangible force. Xander tightened his grip on Syra, his mind racing. They were out of options, out of time. The Nexus's energy was building to a crescendo, the very air humming with the power of a caged star. When it blew, it would take the Morkala with it, but it would take Xander and Axira too. Unless a desperate, impossible idea took root in Xander's mind. The Nexus was a machine of the Zal-Kira, designed to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe. If he could interface with it directly, merge his consciousness with its systems, he could open a rift, a portal, back to the safety of Earth, back home. But the cost, the sheer strain of linking his mind to a machine designed for beings far beyond human. It would burn him out, leave him a hollow shell, a husk drained of all thought, all identity. He looked down at Thyra, at the woman who had become his world, his everything, and he knew, with a certainty that transcended all doubt, all fear, he would pay that price, and gladly. His voice rough with emotion. "Do you trust me?" She met his gaze, her eyes clear and unwavering despite the pain that racked her body. "With my life," she whispered, "with my soul." Xander nodded, swallowing hard past the lump in his throat. "Then hold on to me," he said, "and don't let go, no matter what." He closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind, his very essence. He could feel the Nexus, feel its vast, incomprehensible power, the secrets of the cosmos whispering at the edges of his consciousness. He plunged into that infinite expanse, letting it fill him, flow through him. It was agony and ecstasy, destruction and creation, the death of everything he was, and the birth of something new, something greater. Reality shattered around him, the very fabric of space-time unraveling at his touch. He could see everything be everything, every atom, every star, every dimension and possibility. And through it all, through the maelstrom of unbearable sensation and revelation, he held on to Xera. She was his anchor, his lifeline, the one constant in a universe gone mad. With a thought, a wish, he tore open the walls between worlds. A rift yawned before them, a swirling vortex of light and energy. Beyond it, Xander could see the familiar constellations of Earth's night sky, the gleaming spires of the city he had called home. The Morkala screamed, surging forward in a last, desperate attempt to claim their prize. But it was too late. The Nexus was coming apart, its power unleashed in a cataclysmic blast of light and sound and primal force. Xander felt it wash over him, through him, annihilating everything in its path. But he was beyond it now, beyond the reach of destruction or despair. He was infinite. He was eternal. He was one with the cosmos. With Axilera held tight against his chest, Xander stepped into the rift, into the blinding radiance of a future unknown. The portal closed behind them, sealing away the horrors of that desolate planet, the last remnants of a tyranny long forgotten. And in the heart of a machine that had once enslaved the stars, in the crucible of a love that had defied the bounds of worlds and species, two souls, forever intertwined, found their way home. A new beginning. Consciousness returned slowly, fragmented images and sensations coalescing into a hazy semblance of reality. Xander floated in a sea of confusion, his mind struggling to make sense of the chaos that engulfed him. He remembered light, blinding, all-consuming, searing through his very being. He remembered the Nexus, the machine god of the Zal-Kira, its power thrumming through his veins like liquid fire. He remembered Syra, her broken body cradled in his arms, her eyes shining with love and trust as the world unraveled around them. And he remembered a choice, a sacrifice made in the heat of desperation and devotion. He had given himself to the Nexus, let it burn away everything he was, everything he had ever been, in exchange for a chance at salvation. A chance to save Ira, to bring her to the safety of his world. Had it worked? Had they made it through? Or was this the afterlife, the great beyond that awaited all living things at the end of their journey? Xander, can you hear me? The voice cut through the haze like a beacon, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Xander latched onto it, let it pull him up, towards the light and the warmth and the world of the living. With a gasp, he opened his eyes, blinking against the sudden brightness. Shapes swam into focus, the sterile white walls of a hospital room, the beeping and whirring of medical equipment, and her, Axelra, sitting by his bedside, her hand clasped tightly around his. She was battered and bruised, her skin pale and her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but to Xander, she had never looked more beautiful. Axelra, he croaked, his voice rough and alien to his own ears. What happened? Where are we? She smiled, a small tired thing that nonetheless lit up the room like a sun. We made it, Xander. We're on Earth, your Earth. Earth. The word hit him like a physical blow, a tidal wave of emotions and memories crashing over him. He had done it. He had brought them home, pulled them from the jaws of oblivion, and delivered them to safety. But at what cost? He tried to sit up, to take stock of himself, but a lance of pain shot through his skull, sending him crashing back against the pillows. Axelra was there in an instant, her hands gentle but firm as she held him steady. Easy, she murmured, her voice thick with concern. You've been through a lot. The doctors said. They said it's a miracle you're alive at all. Xander frowned, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of his memory. The Nexus, he said slowly. I merged with it, didn't I? Used its power to open a rift. Axelra nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You did. You saved us, Xander. You saved everything. But Xander could see the truth behind her words, the unspoken fear that lurked in the depths of her gaze. But there's something wrong, isn't there? Something with me. Axelra hesitated, and in that moment, Xander felt a cold dread settle into the pit of his stomach. The strain of the merge, she said softly, the sheer enormity of what you did, it had consequences. She took a shuddering breath, seeming to steel herself. The doctors, they say there's been damage. To your brain, your neural pathways. They don't know the full extent yet, but it's likely there will be changes, deficits. Changes, deficits. The words echoed in Xander's mind, cold and clinical and utterly terrifying. He had known the risks, known what he was sacrificing when he gave himself to the Nexus. But to hear it spoken aloud, to face the stark reality of it. What kind of changes, he asked, his voice small and lost in the sudden vastness of the room. Syra's grip on his hand tightened, as if she could anchor him by sheer force of will. They're not sure yet, she admitted. It could be memory loss, cognitive impairment, personality shifts, or it could be something else entirely, something we can't even imagine. Xander closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those possibilities settling onto his shoulders like a physical burden. The man he had been, the life he had known, they were gone, shattered beyond repair by the choices he had made, the sacrifices he had accepted. But then, through the darkness and the fear, he felt a warmth blooming in his chest. A light, pure and unwavering, emanating from the place where his hand joined with Axelra's. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with a newfound steadiness. It doesn't matter, he said softly. Whatever happens, whatever I become, I'll still have you. And that's worth everything. Axelra's eyes widened, a single tear escaping to trail down her cheek. Oh, Xander, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Of course you'll have me. Always and forever. In this world and any other. She leaned down, pressing her forehead to his in a gesture of intimacy and connection that transcended words. In that moment, Xander felt the fears and doubts that had plagued him beginning to recede, replaced by a sense of peace, of rightness that suffused his entire being. He had no idea what the future held, What trials and challenges awaited him in this new life, this new reality? His mind, his very self, had been irrevocably altered. The man he had been lost to the fires of necessity and love. But he was not alone. He had Zaira, her strength and her devotion a constant light in the darkness. Together, they had crossed the gulfs between worlds, had stood against the tide of shadows and emerged, not unscathed but unbroken. And together, they would face whatever came next. They would build a new life, a new future, from the ashes of the old. They would learn and grow and heal, not in spite of the scars they bore, but because of them. For in the end, it was not the destination that mattered, but the journey. And as long as they had each other, as long as their hearts beat in unison and their souls touched across the infinite expanse, then no distance was too great to cross, no darkness too deep to illuminate. In love, they had found the strength to reshape the very fabric of the universe. And in love, they would find the courage to face the great unknown, to step hand in hand into the vast, uncharted reaches of a future bright with promise. As Xander lay there, Thyra's warmth and presence enveloping him like a shield against all the chaos and uncertainty of existence, he felt a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It was a small thing, tentative and fragile in the face of all they had endured, all they had yet to face. But it was a beginning. A new dawn rising over the horizon of their intertwined destinies. And as the first rays of that dawn touched his face, warming his skin and illuminating the path ahead, Xander knew, with a certainty that surpassed all doubt and fear, that no matter what the future held, no matter what trials and transformations awaited him, he was exactly where he was meant to be. Home, with her, forever. The end.